Hey everybody, welcome back to 6 Points Youth Group and Now. I'm your host Timothy Holt. Behind the camera is Zander with us tonight. Our teens are at the fireside service outside with the young kids helping out, having a good time. And this is being recorded on Wednesday during our normal meeting time. However, due to some technical issues, it's not live, so I will be getting it uploaded as soon as possible later in the evening. With that, we are continuing our look at 1 Corinthians. So, Xander, what is something you know about ancient Corinth?
Nothing.
Sounds good. That means we can start right at the top. So, ancient Corinth was a major metropolitan city. If you've been following the last two Wednesdays Bible studies, you can know that the Apostle Paul visited there for 18 months, starting in 51 AD. And in 56 AD, he writes this letter to Christians. It is to Christians. I'm emphasizing that because I think a lot of times we forget or neglect to take note that he is writing to Christians. He's not writing to the general populace in the city, which was definitely not Christian, very steeped in polytheism, Greek mythology and religion, as well as Roman and other religions. So definitely not a Christian worldview being dominant in ancient Corinth. Why do we care? Well, because the principles he lays out for the Christians in Corinth have direct impact on our teenagers and you watching this video today. Xander, how many classmates in your class as a freshman in high school do you think go to church regularly?
I don't know.
Take a guess.
0?
Wow. Well, I know one. You.
Well, I don't know who is counting me.
Okay. So you don't know any of your friends or classmates that attend church
I
regularly?
don't know.
None, right?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So the reason I'm pointing that out is that's like ancient Corinth. Christianity was brand new on the scene, and these new early adopters of Christianity had a very hard time juggling what does it mean to be a Christian. And today, like Xander, as a freshman, finishing his freshman year of high school, he doesn't know any of his classmates that attend church regularly or have a Christian worldview or claim to be Christians. Zero.
I never asked.
Never asked. Why?
I don't know.
Why?
It didn't come up, I guess.
Okay. So that makes it difficult. But when you have someone who is new to Christianity, they don't know what it means to be a Christian. They have no idea. And Paul writes to these new Christians, and he covers a lot of this. So last week we covered chapters 1 through 4. This week we're going to cover chapter 5, 6, and 7. And the reason is because they have a general flow. So let's get to it. Just like last week, I'm not going to read all the text. You can do that on your own. Don't take my word for it. Pick it up, read it for yourself. But let's dive in. So, first of all, chapter 5 starts out with, "It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and such sexual immorality as it is not even named among the Gentiles." That word Gentiles means anyone who is not a Jew. Most early Christians were Jewish to start with. And Paul is saying that a man, and then he says what that sexual immorality is. So, that a man has his father's wife. Xander,
What?
did you hear that?
Yeah, I have heroes.
Okay. A man has his father's wife. What do you think Paul's talking about?
I don't know.
Well, your dad's wife,
I shan't leave him.
and that would be like you getting with my wife.
Okay.
That's pretty disgusting.
Sure.
You don't think so?
I do think so.
Okay. Yeah. Paul starts this section off with that. He ends chapter 4 with, "What do you want? Shall I come to you with a rod, or in love and a gentleness of spirit?" And then he starts out with that. Now, I don't know anyone who would say, "Hey, that's a good idea." Yeah, that's
Y'all been
pretty
to
low.
Alabama?
So, huh?
Y'all been to Alabama?
I have.
Okay.
However, even most people without a Christian worldview or Christian background would say, yeah, that's wrong. But there were early Christians in Corinth doing just that. And then he says, "You are puffed up and have not rather mourned that he who has done this deed might be taken away from among you." And he goes on and talks about how this immorality, sexual immorality, is so pervasive. And today, Xander, you have TikTok, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How often when you're on TikTok does something pop up that you just go, well, that's not really a good thing?
I don't know. Once in a while, I guess.
Pretty often?
Sure.
Because I know when I overhear it, I'm like, Xander, yeah, that's a no-go.
Just
here,
because you don't like it, that doesn't mean I
Okay.
don't like it.
But it's very pervasive. Sexual immorality is extremely pervasive in our society.
That's why this might
One of my sons, a girl in his class, asked him, "Do you know what month it is?" And his response was, "It's June."
That's hilarious, by the way.
And she got really mad at him because apparently it's this Rainbow Pride Month thing.
Pride Month.
Okay, and that has to do with sexual immorality. An entire month celebrating sexual immorality. And I liked his response. It's June. And that would be my response too. The month is June. And Paul says that this is so pervasive. He's talking to Christians here, and he says, you got to get that under control. You're supposed to be set apart and be morally upright, and that includes sexual contact. And he spends he starts it off and he relates it to feasts and leaven. That would be yeast and bread, just a little bit. Leaven's the entire loaf. And he goes on and talks about immorality must be judged in the church. As Christians, if someone professes to be Christians, we need to hold them accountable to Christ and that standard. Paul is not saying that we need to expect non-Christians to behave as Christians, but we are expected to hold our fellow Christians to that standard. If you profess to be a Christian, you gotta own it. You gotta walk it, you gotta talk it, you gotta be it. Because how easy is it for someone who is not a Christian to go, "You claim to be a Christian, but I don't see anything different between you and me." That makes the Christian a hypocrite. And I hear that often when I talk to non-Christians. Well, Christians are hypocrites. They're just hypocrites. Why is that? It's right here, not judging immorality inside our own homes and inside our own houses. And as Christians, we gotta own it. That we can't just be Sunday morning Christians. We can't just be Easter and Christmas Christians. We have to be Christians all day, every day. Chapter 6 talks about suing people and legal ramifications. I don't know very many teenagers that sue people, but the point is still the same. He's saying, verse 2, he has, "And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matter?" It's a rhetorical question. He's saying, you know what? As Christians, we're going to take over the world. And if we're going to take over the world, then why can't we settle disputes among ourselves? Why do we have to go to the courts to settle these disputes? And pretty much almost all of chapter 6 covers that. The second half of chapter 6 is Paul is reinforcing this idea of body and unity with actually the body. And he says, all things are lawful to me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Food for the stomach, and the stomach for foods, but God will destroy both it and them. Now the body is not for sexual immorality. He's bringing it back full circle. But for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God both raised up the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. So he says there's one body. So Zander, how many fingers you got?
10.
How many toes you got?
10.
Okay. How many biceps you got?
2.
2. Got the gun show, right?
Sure.
For those of you who don't know, Zander lifts weights quite a bit, and he's definitely getting ripped. So I give him a hard time for it. You guys can't see him, but he's giving me this like weird look, like, come on, Dad, seriously. But you have 10 toes, 10 fingers. You have different body parts. So your stomach has a purpose, your esophagus, your eyes. Some work better than others. But they all have to work, all those individual parts have to work together, or the entire body doesn't function well. And may not function at all. So Paul is saying that's how the church needs to operate. I have a very distinctive personality. It's loud, sometimes it's obnoxious, very steeped in comedy and dry humor, deadpan humor. My kids get annoyed with me a lot for it. However, that doesn't mean that somebody who's more stoic and reserved and we can't get along, or even that we have the same, we should do the same thing. It's not true. We all have different things. A good mentor of mine, he used to say, it takes all kinds of people to win all kinds of people. And in the church, we need everyone. Because everyone has a place. And that's what Paul's saying here. He's saying everyone has a place, and you need to find that place. You need to get involved so that your talents, your skills, your strong suits can complement someone else's weaknesses. And I like his illustration. But he ends that section again back to the sexual immorality. Flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? He takes this as a bridge, a transition. Keep in mind, these letters were read aloud upon delivery. Okay? And he takes it as a transition into this chapter on marriage. And I'm going to be honest. For those of you who think, well, let's go back to what month it is. What month is it, Zander?
June.
It's June!
The month of a few people's birthdays.
Yeah, and apparently some people who want to promote sexual immorality as being, hey, it's my right, and go that way. Paul unequivocally talks to Christians here and says, lays out what marriage is, chapter 7. He says, now concerning the things of which you wrote to me. So he's replying to their letters. He's replying to their correspondences, their questions, and he's answering here. And he says, let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. Notice those are all singular. One wife, one husband, and the husband is for the wife, and the wife is for the husband. The wife does not have the authority over her own body, but the husband does, and likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. And he reiterates that. The wife for the husband for the wife. If you want a long-lasting relationship, a strong relationship that will last your entire life, go find that old couple And yes, they are out there. You got to look for them, but you'll know them when you see them because they're the old couple still holding hands and still showing affection for each other. And you ask them what they'll take, and you listen because they've done it. They've been there. My parents have been married for over 40 years. They don't always see eye to eye, and sometimes, you know what? They don't agree with each other, but at the end of the day, they're a husband and wife, and the husband is for the wife, and the wife is for the husband. It says, do not deprive one another except with consent for a time. In other words, sometimes you might not feel like it, but again, it's the wife for the husband for the wife. That's not the wife for the wife, that's not the husband for the husband. There's no selfishness or narcissism in a marriage that works and works well. He keeps going on, and he spends a lot of time talking about marriage vows. Remember, he's talking to Christians. He's not talking to people you see at school. He's not talking to politicians. He's not talking to people who have nothing to do with Christianity or want nothing to do with it. He is writing this directly to Christians. So if you know someone who claims to be a Christian and they're involved in this stuff, Paul is unequivocally saying, call them out on it. 13, and a woman who has a husband who does not believe. Now he's talking about that unequally thing, where one is a Christian, one is not. And he says, if you're a husband, if you're a wife, and your husband is not a Christian, but he is content with staying with you, then you need to stay with him. Because you can bring him into Christianity by showing the love of Jesus Christ to him on a daily basis in your marriage, and vice versa. However, he says, if your non-Christian husband or non-Christian wife says, see ya, I'm out of here, he says, let them go. Let them go. Say, here's the door, and let them go. The last half of chapter 7 is where we're going to be closing out here. And it's talking about widows and the unmarried, living as we're called. Now, apparently what was going on in Corinth is there was some widows, some unmarried women who were relying on the church to provide their needs. It's basically welfare. Okay, being lazy. All right? And this is probably going to step on some toes. But you know what? It says what it says. It doesn't say what it doesn't say. And let me see where it's at here. Well, we'll go with 29. But this I say, brethren, the time is short. So from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they have none. That's not what I want to start. But I want you to be without. There's a difference between. Here we go. 34. That's where I wanted. There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. By the way, virgin in this case is a translation of the Greek term referring to a unmarried damsel, a young woman who is not married. Yes, they generally were virgins as in never having sex, but it's referring specifically to young women who are not married. And by and large, teenage women are not, what then? Married. They're not married. How many of your classmates are married? 0. None.
I know of.
All right. And he says, the unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, and she may be holy. And then he keeps going down, and he says, this is for your own profit. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity but the power over his own will. All right. So then he who gives her in marriage does well. All right. I'm all the way down on 38, if you're following along. Okay. So 38. And he's talking about a woman being given unto marriage. He's bringing it back and full circle. And he's basically saying it all comes down to that sexual immorality that started us off. If you can't resist, then you need to get married. Because marriage is beautiful. Marriage is wonderful. But you have to be committed. A teenager I was talking with earlier this week was talking about girlfriends cheating and wives cheating and adultery, fornication. And he said, no real man, this is his words, he's 16, his words, not mine. Okay? He said, no real man will want to share his lady. His girl is his girl, and he will do everything for her because he's a man, but he will not share her. Now, that's pretty explicit. This is coming from a 16-year-old boy talking about manhood. And Paul basically says that right there. Okay? Paul's stance is if you can control yourself and those urges, which are very strong, then you need to do so. But if you can't, then the two of you need to get married and stay married together. Because anything outside of that is sexually immoral and wrong, and it's going to lead a life of destruction. It's going to lead a path a mile wide of devastation, heartache, and destruction. That's where we're going to be leaving off tonight. Zander and I are going to head out to the fireside service, see what the kids are doing, have food, and have some fun and fellowship, because that's also important. But that's where I'm going to leave us off. And with that, if a man thinks he is behaving improperly towards a virgin, remember that's an unmarried woman, young lady. If she is past the flower of her youth, now we're moving up to being older, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin, let them marry. That last sentence there, let them marry, is his way of saying, if you cannot resist the urge, you need to get married. Keep it until you're married. Once you're married, have at it, make as many babies as you want. But outside of marriage, whether it's fornication before you're married or adultery after you're married, it is sinful. And Christians should have no part of it. No part of it. So, what month is it? It's June. If you want to celebrate immorality like the world does, then don't claim to be a Christian. If you're a Christian, then stand on Christianity. Stand on Christ and moral uprightness. Stand for it. Expecting sinners to behave like Christians is foolish. Expecting Christians to behave like sinners is just hypocritical nonsense and should be called out as such. So, don't take my word for it. Pick up Paul's letter to the Christians in Corinth. Read it for yourself, and may God bless you.